Hi, I'm Ken. Today we're going to take a deep dive into British Machin stamps, but don't worry, it's not going to be that bad. This is one of the first stamps issued in this series way back in 1967, and this is the longest running stamp series ever, coming out first with stamps like this one, all the way to until a few months before the Queen's passing in 2022. That's 56 years of stamps with this set. I know some collectors hate this series, considering it to be too fiddly with all the details of phosphor bands, elliptical holes, and security features. 56 years is a long time for a series, and there's bound to be multiple printers, postal rate changes, and technical advances in that time that give this series its complexity. For many of you, this complexity is just too much to bother with. For you folks, I'm going to break down how to sort and collect these stamps by design, denomination, and color. That's still a meaningfully large collection, but not technically difficult. For others of you, wrestling down this complexity is exactly what you love about the hobby. There are hundreds of listed catalog numbers to collect with this set, and if you want to dive even deeper, there are thousands of detailed varieties to satisfy the most detail-oriented among us. I largely collect these by catalog number. I love to look at a sea of stamps, all with the same design, but with different colors and denominations. Let's take a look at my collection to get oriented before we talk about how to work with these stamps. This is my first page of Machin stamps. These are the stamps that came out with the old pre-decimal currency style. I love the look of this kind of page. Not only do I get to see a whole range of colors, I get a sense of progress by looking at the spaces I still have to fill. I collect British stamps by Stanley Gibbons Concise Catalog numbers. Boy, I'd love to share the files for these pages with you, but I don't have permission to do that. You'll notice that on this page I have multiple copies of the same color, and that's because the catalog lists a few varieties for each of these stamps. I collect these stamps at an intermediate level. You could collect at a more basic level with just the color and denomination differences. You wouldn't even need a catalog for that, and it would still be a substantial and interesting collection. Later in this video, I'm going to break down my recommendations about how to collect these stamps at various levels of complexity. First, we'll go over these stamps at Machin's 101 level, talking about collecting just the various colors and denominations, essentially collecting the left side of this table. When we're done with that, we'll move on to Machin's 201, the right side of the table. When we get there, I'll cover how to identify all the varieties listed in the Stanley Gibbons Concise Catalog. In that section, we'll have to get into topics like the Phosphor Bands, elliptical perforations, and security features. Those really aren't that hard at the most basic level. Once you see those features, you'll be able to sort them without a problem. Next, we'll move on to Machin's 301. That section will largely talk about the variety of stamps that all get listed under the same Stanley Gibbons catalog number. Stanley Gibbons doesn't make catalog numbers for sheet, booklet, and coil versions of these stamps, nor does it have listings for varieties printed by different printing houses. But advanced collectors try and get all these variations too. Finally, we'll skim over Machin's 401. Those are the details that the truly obsessive collectors will want to get into. That's more detail than I care to track, but I know many of you would love to get to that level of detail, so I'll summarize what to look for there too. But let's get back to my stamps. Stamps on this page use the pre-decimal currency. In 1971, Great Britain switched the way they did currency from the old system of pence, shilling, and pounds to a new system with just pence and pounds. In the old system, there were 20 shillings to a pound and 12 pence to a shilling, or a total of 240 pence to a pound. In the new system, they dropped the shilling and changed pence to be 100 to the pound. To be slightly fair, they changed pence to new pence, but that's not a semantic detail that most people care about. Anyway, the two pences had different values. In the old system, and with these stamps, the pence is labeled with a D, like in that 4-pence stamp. In the new system, they were labeled with a P. In that other stamp, the single quote sign stands for shilling, so that stamp is for 1 shilling 9 pence. These pre-decimal stamps are easy to tell apart, but it can be easy to forget about the DP distinction. So these stamps came in many formats. These booklets were a very common format, and I've got an example of that on this page because I think it's interesting. This particular book has 12 stamps, each denominated 5 pence. The total price of this booklet was 5, quote, dash, shown in the top right. That translates to 5 shilling and no pence, which makes sense because there are 12 pence to a shilling. I'm not going to open up this booklet for you because I don't like the stress that puts on the perforated folds. But you should know that these stamps are perforated along the edges of the booklet too, and that makes it really hard to tell the difference between stamps from a sheet and stamps from this booklet. There are ways, but we'll get to that later. Anyway, that's my pre-decimal page. It's a good start. Let's turn the page. This page has my high-value Machin stamps. It includes some of the pre-decimal period at the top and stamps from the decimal period at the bottom. I have all the pre-decimal values, but I'm missing 3 of the decimal value stamps. Except for the size difference, these stamps are the same design as the previous stamps. In the decimal era, there are so many stamps that I decided to make an index table for them. I'm not going to talk through this table quite yet, but we'll get there. Each line along the left is a different denomination and color combination. The table elements break them into details of the various catalog entries, which we'll dive into later. The table is so long that I had to split it across 2 pages. Altogether, there are 103 different basic stamps in this section. And here are those stamps. Again, I'm off to a good start, but I love the way this page looks, and this format helps me see my progress. This is my second page of these stamps. I've allocated 5 pages to cover all these early variants. I think that's going to be enough. This is my page as of today for the no value indicated stamps. No value indicated is similar to what the US calls forever stamps, although in this case they aren't actually valid forever. The British postal system does invalidate stamps from time to time when new design types come out. These are denominated either first or second for first and second class mail. There's a third label of E to cover the letter rate to Europe. So my copy of the Stanley Gibbons Catalog only goes to the year 2000. That's the same with this page. There were NVI stamps released after the year 2000 and I don't have them listed here yet. I don't have any stamps for that period either, but that'll come. Anyway, I've been doing a bunch of research of the more modern Machin stamps to prepare for this video, and as part of that I've updated pages with the new information. We'll get there in a while, but with that update I've split this page across 5 different pages. The use of NVI stamps really took off in the period between 2000 and the 22 more years of these stamps. In 1999, these stamps came out with the Machin design echoing the earlier Victoria portrait from the penny black stamp. The stamps on this page are also called anniversary stamps, commemorating the 150th anniversary of the postage stamp. Technically, these are both commemorative and definitive stamps. I think it's fair for me to include them in my definitive collection. These came out starting in 1999, but there are versions of this design that were released as late as 2017. I had to update this page to reflect those new stamps too. There's a similar design to this that features King George V and Elizabeth. The stamp was only released on a souvenir sheet, what Great Britain calls a miniature sheet. It's clearly a commemorative stamp, and being that it was the only one released on that miniature sheet, it doesn't even have a proper standalone stamp catalog number. But it's possible to find it used as a single stamp as postage, so I've added the stamp to my updated page and retitled it to the 2 Monarchs issues. Starting in 1993, Machin stamps were issued with a single elliptical perforation on each side. This is a security measure to prevent forgeries. I really have only started to get stamps with elliptical perfs, and the number of stamps of this type has expanded since I first made this page. Some of the stamp numbers even changed as they added more. With this series complete now, I think I can safely finalize this page. I made the new page an index page like I did with the earlier stamps. I'll remount these stamps on those new pages. If you're a 101 level collector, you won't have to worry about elliptical versus regular perforation. Some of your stamps will have them and some won't. There are a few stamps that come with both styles, but you don't have to worry about what version you have so long as you collect each unique color and denomination. And these are the new pages I created. They update my album from where it previously ended in 2000 to go all the way through the life and reign of Queen Elizabeth II. It really won't be too big a problem to update my album with these new pages since I didn't have many of the more recent issues anyway. But now I'm ready for all the others. Okay, I'm off to a good start with this collection, and I think I've got a decent organization for these stamps. Like I said, I mostly collect to the catalog numbers, and while there's a lot of them, they're not too hard to identify. Before we do that, though, let's dive into 101 level collecting of these Machin stamps. The design of this stamp came from a relief sculpture commissioned from British artist Arnold Machin, hence the name of this series. At the simplest level, our 101 level, we can just collect the different designs, denominations, and color differences. This is just a sample of the color and denomination differences for this design. All these stamps are the same size and feature a numeric denomination. Altogether, I count 262 unique color denomination types for this one stamp design. For a sense of how many types that is, this image shows 40 stamps. It would take 6.5 pages like this to show all the possibilities. Still, this is something you could do without a catalog. First, sort your stamps by denomination, and as you get each new stamp, you simply compare it to the stamps you have, inserting new ones as you find them. If you really want a list, you still don't need a catalog. Wikipedia has a list of all the Machin stamps by denomination and color. Search for List of Machin stamps, or there's a link to it from the Machin series page. There's actually a little more going on in this picture than denomination and colors. Those first two rows are the pre-decimal value stamps. There are 16 of them in this size. There's another 4 in a larger size, but we'll get to that in a moment. Anyway, these first two rows have a D in their pence denomination instead of a P. Still, even if you forget to check that, there's no overlap of colors between the pre-decimal and decimal versions of these designs. Easy. You might notice that some of the pre-decimal stamps put the denomination on the bottom right instead of the left. These are the only ones like this. Finally, if you look at the last two stamps, you'll notice they have elliptical perforations. Here's a bigger example. Notice that this stamp comes with 2 perforation styles, but at this 101 level, you don't have to pay any attention to that at all. Many of these stamps come in both versions, but you don't have to give that a thought. After all, you already have 262 types of these stamps. Why make it more complicated? Unless you enjoy that. We'll go deeper soon enough. Honestly, if you can get all the various denominations, you've made yourself a pretty sweet collection. I think this 101 level collection is a really good way to go. But there's still a few more stamps in this 101 level collection. You'll notice on the left the pre-decimal and decimal stamps we've already talked about. The 2 larger stamps next to them are the higher value stamps. They come in 2 sizes, but all you really have to think about is that the higher value stamps are larger. There are 15 of those. Below the larger stamps, there are stamps with 2 portraits on them. We went over those when we looked at my collection. The first one is the Victoria and Elizabeth anniversary of the Postage stamp issue. The second one is the one-off George V stamp from that souvenir sheet. Altogether, at this 101 level, there's just 8 of these you need to collect. The 1 George V stamp, 6 denominations of the Victoria version, and 1 of the Victoria stamps denominated as first class. You might notice that there are 2 similar-looking 20 pence stamps. One of them shades Queen Victoria in a cream color. The first class stamp uses the same cream shade for Victoria. The other 20 pence stamp drops that cream color and shades Victoria with the same brownish-black shade as Queen Elizabeth. You could decide to collect only one of these since those 2 shades are so similar. The next 3 show stamps denominated as first or second class. These are the different varieties of the basic first and second class stamps. There are other more specific rated stamps that I left off this image because I couldn't fit them all here. I'll show those in a moment. You'll see all across the first row the stamps are denominated as first class. These cover the first class letter rate and came out as a type of forever stamp, although from time to time Royal Mail invalidates postage. For example, in 2023, when they added barcodes to stamps, stamps like these without barcodes were invalidated. These old stamps can be turned in for the new barcoded stamps, and as of now there's no end date for making this swap, but I expect that won't be allowed forever. The second row has a few other formats of these first-class stamps. The first one with the 2 queens we already covered. I've added it to this picture, but it's not another type to collect. If you're collecting at the 101 level, You'll just need to decide if you want to collect this stamp with the other Victoria stamps or with these NVI stamps. Next comes the second-class stamps. In Great Britain, second-class letters are a little less expensive but may take a few days to be delivered. Royal Mail delivers most first-class mail in 1 day, and most second-class mail in 2 to 3 days. On the next row, there are 3 larger format stamps that were issued on special sheets, and those are kind of fun. Following those are some horizontal format stamps labeled first or second class, but with the word large added. Those large stamps pay the rate on larger format letters for a slightly higher price. Finally, that bottom right stamp has an E on it. It pays for the rate for a first-class letter to anywhere in Europe, E for Europe. These stamps are also no-value indicated stamps, but clearly have a lot more happening on them. They're called service-inscribed stamps and cover the rate for various special services offered by Royal Mail. Across the first row are various international rates. Those red and blue stripes indicate airmail, but I don't know if they really all went by air. Britain is an island, but there is the Channel. Anyway, the first 2 cover the rates to Europe based on weight. The second 2 are for other non-European countries, again in 2 weight ranges. And that last one covers the worldwide postcard rate. Those orange stamps cover the first class and first class large rates for mail that needs to be signed for. The difference between the 2 is that Royal Mail's signed for rate includes tracking. And finally, those 2 blue and silver stamps cover the special delivery rate by weight. That service is signed for, includes tracking, and promises next day delivery by 1 p.m. And with that, we've finished the NVI stamps. Altogether, at this 101 level, there are 32 more stamps to collect. Next, we have the new barcoded stamps. These were introduced as an anti-forgery device, and with this change, almost all the other stamps were invalidated for postal use after a brief grace period. These first came out in 2021, and the Queen passed away before many of these issues were released to complicate Machin collecting. Altogether, there are only 19 varieties of these Machins. Along that first row are the familiar first and second class stamps, and then a range of stamps that when combined can make up any rate you might want. There's a similar set to these featuring King Charles, but that's for another video. And with that, we're done with our Machin 101 varieties. I know, there's one more stamp in this image that I didn't cover, that gold foil stamp on the bottom right. By rights, it's just another larger high-value stamp, but it's so cool to see I didn't want you to miss it. Actually, it's in a slightly different size than the other high-value stamps. It originally was released on a special sheet for the golden anniversary of the Machin stamps. It's a little wider than either of the other 2 sizes, taller than the first and shorter than the second. And now we really are done with the stamps of our Machin 101 collection. Altogether, by my count, there are 334 stamps in this simple collection. Fewer if you decide not to count either the Victoria or George V stamps. While there are a lot of stamps, identification at this level is easy, and all in all a really fun and easy series to collect. It could keep you busy for a very long time. Before we get off this 101 view of these stamps, I should give you the 102 level collection information. The Machin stamps were not only used in Great Britain. There were 4 other countries in the UK that used the Machin design: Northern Ireland, Scotland, the Isle of Man, and Wales. There are no Machin stamps for Ireland. I haven't added these to my Great Britain collection yet, although at some point I'll expand my collection to be a full UK collection. Each of these stamps features the classic Machin design of the Queen's head, but shrinks her a bit to fit in a country-specific symbol. You can see them here. There are a total of 188 color denomination types for these country-specific Machins. So not a small addition to a simple collection. But of course you can skip these and stick to the 101 collection. At least you should know they exist. And these stamps are just as easy to collect at this level as the British Machin stamps, just colors and denomination. There's only one oddity in this set. This first-class stamp from Wales is bilingual, using both the English ST ordinal with the 1 and the Welsh AF ordinal. There's just one of them, and there isn't any other orangish first-class stamp to confuse it with, but still it's worth highlighting because I think it's interesting. We're almost done with the 100 level overview, but I think I'd be remiss if I didn't let you know about 3 other design types, so let's look at Machin's 103. These are all printed postage style stamps. Many people don't collect printed postage stamps. I think in part because they don't have a fixed denomination. Because of this, catalogs struggle with how to list and value these. If they do list these kinds of stamps, they certainly aren't in the main postage section, segregated to the back of the book. And sometimes they don't even get a catalog number. In some ways, these aren't really different from a printed postage meter. The reason I'm showing these is because they so prominently feature our familiar Machin design. That first stamp, the large one on the left, is called a Golden Horizon label. I've got 2 of these so far. When I saw my first one, I had to have it. It really looks like a giant Machin stamp with its Machin head, perforations, and that background of wavy security printing. We'll cover security printing in the 201 section later. So a Horizon label is a computer-vended postage label. These originally came out on a plain paper like this. There's nothing about the plain white ones that makes me want to treat it like a stamp. They're collectibles, sure, but I wouldn't call it a stamp. This label has no image, no perforations, not even fake ones. Unless you collect printed postal labels, this wouldn't be in your collection. The US makes something similar. This click and ship label is essentially the same thing, although a lot more busy. So what do you think seeing the Golden Horizon label now? Is it a stamp or just a label with a better outfit? It doesn't really matter. I'll be adding a copy to my album because it helps tell the Machin story and because I like it. But I don't plan on starting a collection of all these types of labels, and I certainly won't be collecting the white labels. That said, these Horizon labels do have some variety to them. This is a newer design that I came across. It's a lot busier with that computer code on it, but still it features a Machin head, and if I find one of those, I'll add it to my page too. Let's move on. Those skinny stamps in the middle are also computer postage. They're called Post and Go labels. There are lots of designs on these labels, and they all look more like stamps than the Horizon labels. Stanley Gibbons does give these catalog numbers, I suspect because they only came in specific denominations. I think these are much closer to Machin stamps than the Horizon labels. They have a unique code on them, but so does the later barcoded Machin stamps. Honestly, the only thing that makes these different from the barcoded stamps is that these were printed on demand. The text anyway, and the barcoded stamps were printed in advance. I'm not sure that's such a sharp distinction. Still, I've put them in this 103 level collecting section because they aren't listed as stamps, and many collectors choose not to collect them. Now you have a choice to make. Finally, look at the label in the upper right. That's a third type of printed postage with the Queen's head on it. It's called a Framis label. You could select the denomination on these, and not surprisingly, the catalog doesn't list a number for them, although it does mention them. I put this one here because of the Queen's head in the upper corner. You might choose to get examples of these too. I will. But these are not Machin heads. Instead, this design is from a bust by Mary Gillick, and it was featured on British coins. Notice the ribbon coming out of the back of the Queen's hair. That Framis label is so small and done in such low resolution it might be hard to make out. I've done my best to enlarge and enhance that little image. You should be able to make out that ribbon now. Also, I tried to leave room to see the underlying Machin head image. Notice that it doesn't have the ribbon. Instead, the Machin has a crown, which is missing from this Framis label head. Actually, if you look closely at the coin, you may be able to make out a wreath around the Queen's head. Whenever the Queen's head is shown on commemorative stamps in silhouette, this Gillick bust is used, not the Machin head. How about that for a detail you never thought about? And with that, we're done with all the 100 level information you're going to need to make a great Machin collection. So that's a lot of stamps, but not really that complicated. Easy enough if you don't even need a catalog to collect them. If you just collect to the 101 level, that's 334 stamps. If you add in the 102 level country stamps, you go up to 522. Add a few more if you want to save copies of those printed labels. Manageable. If you're still with me and want to dive deeper, let's look at the Machin head stamps at the 201 level. These are the stamps that are listed in the Stanley Gibbons Concise Catalog, and this is my copy from the year 2000. Don't worry, collecting to the catalog numbers is more complicated, but not too bad. By my count, there are 692 significant catalog numbers of stamps to collect. That's more than double the 334 varieties we had at the 101 level, but it isn't 10 times. I think the best way to do this is to start at the beginning and build up our knowledge as we need it to understand the catalog listings. This table in the upper left is my index of the pre-decimal denominated stamps, the ones with D for pence and shilling value stamps. For the 101 level collecting, you just need one stamp per line. You'll notice that there are 3 colors for the 4D and 2 for the 8D. Those color variations would be in our 101 level collection. The right column of my table shows the Stanley Gibbons catalog number. You can see that for most of the stamps there's just one catalog number for each variety, but in 3 cases there are multiple catalog numbers for the one color denomination variety. Let's look at the 2D Lake Brown stamps first. The other table here is detail from my Stanley Gibbons catalog. Those are the lines for the stamps we're looking at. Specifically, let's look at the difference between the listing for 726 and 727. You can ignore the numbers to the right. Those are prices for the unused and used versions of these stamps. You can also ignore the dates in parentheses. They might be interesting, but they aren't going to help us identify the differences. The difference between 726 and 727 is the note that says Type 1 and Type 2. There's also the note about 2 bands. We'll get to that in just a minute. The Type 1 and Type 2 difference is a detail about the position of the value on the stamp. On the Type 1 stamp, the value table is spaced further from the left edge. On the Type 2 stamp, it's just a little bit closer. It seems like a minor difference, but Stanley Gibbons and collectors in general consider these to be 2 different stamps. Now look at the listing for stamp 728. It has the Type 2 value position, but in this case, where it used to say 2 bands, it now says 1 center band. What that's referring to is bands of phosphor on the face of the stamp that are used by the post office processing machinery to identify the stamp and validate the postage. I hope this is clear enough in the video. It might be a little hard to see. Each of the stamps on the top row shows a different configuration of phosphor bands. These are barely visible under regular light, but you can see them with the right tilting of the light, especially on unused stamps. The first stamp is labeled 2 band, and those 2 blue lines below the stamp show where to look on the stamp for the bands. They run from the top to the bottom of the stamp above the blue lines. In this picture you might be able to see that the orange above the blue lines looks a little bit darker than the orange in the center of the stamp. The other 3 stamps show similar examples of the center band, left band, and right band. I don't want to spend too much time on this now, but there's a 301 level topic with these bands about their exact positions. Notice on the left band stamp that the band doesn't go all the way to the edge of the stamp. It doesn't go into the white part of the stamp. That's a variant. For most of the phosphor bands, the band goes all the way into the white of the stamp and across the perforations. In fact, the bands are usually printed as a single double wide band between 2 stamps on a sheet. Now take a look at the bottom stamps. Those are what these bands look like under ultraviolet light. I know they look like square brackets. The bands are just a rectangle from the top to the bottom of the stamp, but they look like brackets because the white area of the stamp is so much brighter. You'll also notice that there are 3 different shades of these bands under UV light. You can ignore that for now. That's a 301 level topic. Now let's look at these stamps from a different angle. If you've been struggling to see these, maybe this picture will help. You don't really need a UV light to see these bands. You only need that if you want to collect at a 301 level. The bands on these stamps are easy enough to see by tilting them against the light. It's hard to explain, but if you hold it up towards the light and tilt it around, the bands will show themselves. Try it, you'll see what I mean. Okay then, now these listings are easy to understand. The first stamp, 726, has a Type 1 value and 2 phosphor bands. The second has a Type 2 value position and 2 phosphor bands. And the third stamp has a Type 2 value and a 1 center band. Before we finish with these 2D Lake Brown stamps, I want to make a brief mention of the line that says EY, phosphor omitted. The E indicates that this is a variant included in this catalog, but not in the even more concise Stanley Gibbons British Commonwealth catalog. I'm not sure what E stands for, but how about extra? The Y part of the listing is a specific catalog extension to that catalog number. Maybe E stands for extension? I don't know. So we can read that line as stamp number 276EY, or just 276Y, is the version of the stamp that doesn't have phosphor bands. When it comes to 201 level collecting, I don't count catalog listings that have an E listing for them. That's part of what's included in a 301 level collection. Now let's look at the 3D violet stamp. It should be easy to see the difference between 729 and 730. 729 has one center band and 730 has two bands. You'll also notice a number of E-style listings. Those are all 301 level collecting listings. If you don't want to pay attention to them, you just don't have to. Take a quick look at the lines like the EVY listing. Even if you don't collect these, it's useful to know what that means. In this case, it means the Y version of the EV stamp above it. Finally, notice that there are two lines with an A variant. That means that the variant is also listed in the British Commonwealth Catalogue. In general, that means it's a more well-recognized variant and as such a candidate for our 201 level collection. I make a bold decision when it comes to these. If the well-recognized variant is inexpensive, I include it in my collection. If it's expensive, like these two lines, I leave it out. You could make a different choice. Next, we move to the high-value stamps. I choose to group these on a single page. Notice that there's a mix of D and P pence stamps in this table, and a mix of shilling and pound value stamps. I do it this way because it highlights the one and only oddity I care about when identifying these stamps, the font used for the value. The pre-decimal stamps use a script font and the decimal values use a block font. Still, the only place that matters is with this £1 stamp. The one on the left is the pre-decimal stamp with the script font, that's number 790. The one on the right is the decimal value with the block font, number 831B. The other thing you might notice is that the catalog numbers are odd for the higher value stamps. That's probably because Stanley Gibbons wanted to maintain the order of these stamps after they had already set the £1 and £2 catalog numbers. Odd, but probably a good choice. Now we're moving into the confusing territory. This is the beginning of my table of the decimal value Machin stamps. There is such a variety of these in the catalog that I had to make myself a table to keep track of them all. Before you ask, I'd love to share this table, but I don't have permission from Stanley Gibbons to do that. These stamps are all regularly gummed stamps, not self-adhesive, and all of them have normal perforations. Remember this difference, the elliptical perfs versus the regular perfs? All the stamps in this section have the regular perfs. There's another large table for the elliptical perfs, and we'll get to that in a moment. The other thing to notice about this table is that all the catalog numbers are prefixed with an X. There are so many varieties of these stamps that rather than mix them all over the catalog, Stanley Gibbons decided to put them into a section in the middle of the catalog. That seems like a great decision, but it does mean that these catalog numbers are not even close to date order. A fair trade-off, I think. Let's dive into this table. First, just like with the decimal table, the 101 collection is just the left column of stamps. There are 103 of those, and that's why my table takes up 2 pages. You'll also see columns labeled 2 bands, left, center, and right. Those are the phosphor bands we already talked about. To that, there are 2 phosphor variants we haven't seen before. The first is all over. That is, the phosphor ink covers the whole stamp. That's easy to see, but you'll need a UV light to see it. Second is phosphor paper. For this variety, the paper has the phosphorescent chemical mixed in with it, and then the stamp color is printed on top of that. Again, you'll need a UV light to see that, but what you'll see is a phosphorescent frame around the stamp, and some phosphorescent bleed-through in the image of the Queen's head. But there's one other major thing going on with this table. Above the phosphor band headers, there are 2 headers that say either photo or litho. These stamps were printed with 2 different printing methods. Photo is short for photogravure, and litho is short for lithography. The photogravure process uses a screen printing method that leaves a pixelated look but shows more color tones. Lithography creates a sharper image that sometimes looks a little flat. It's easy to see the difference between the 2 printing styles by looking at the values with a magnifying glass. The photogravure process, like on the left, shows that pixelization on the straight edges that can look like saw teeth. The litho on the right is much straighter. You'll also notice that the photo and litho labels show the name of the printer for those sections. During the production of these stamps, you can tell the printer, Harrison & Sons, J.W. Dunn, House of Cuesta, or Walsall & Carter, largely by these columns, but there are some differences from that in these tables. No matter at this 201 level, the only reason I list it is that sometimes these stamps are referred to by those printer names. There are some other differences in the details of this table that need a mention to understand. Some, like minor color differences and phosphor positions, we've already talked through. I won't go through each of those again. But others are new details, like font changes, that are the only way to tell some issues apart. These three pairs are listed in the catalog as font differences in the denomination. The catalog makes a point that there are plenty of other font differences across stamps with the same value, but cases other than these you can tell apart by other differences like color or phosphor differences, so the catalog doesn't highlight those. These take a magnifying glass to tell apart, and I can't say the difference are obvious even when you look at them. You don't have to memorize these. The catalog has pictures for when you need them, but it seemed worth it to show you these so you know what to look for. On the 3p, the value on type 1 is a little lower than on type 2. Also, the type 1 3 has a serif on the upper tip. For the 10p, the type 1 is a little higher than the type 2, and the shape of the 0 has a little bit more flair to it, not quite italic, but without the left-right symmetry of the type 2. For the 26p, the type 1 digits are wider than the type 2. As a result, the type 1 is closer to the bust than the type 2. The next difference you can only really see on unused stamps. A few stamps came with a special back printing like these that was used to mark stamps that were sold at a discount, D for discount. That way the discounted stamps couldn't be traded in for a profit. This back print was done over the gum, so it usually doesn't survive when you remove a used stamp from its envelope. I think when I get one of these stamps I'll be mounting it upside down to show these back prints. So that's it. Even though this table looks complicated, there's nothing at the 201 level that's particularly difficult to identify. As I sort a pile of these, I pull all the regular gum, regular perf stamps into one pile. Then I sort them by denomination. Then I work with each denomination, further sorting them by color. Finally, I use my table to check what printing and phosphor band options I need to check for. You can use the index in the catalog to do the same thing. For the few cases where there are two options for a stamp, I'll check those details. I'd say it's a little tedious, but it isn't hard. In 1989, these first and second class stamps started to come out. They're also part of this set of regularly perforated stamps, and I put them next to them in my album, but they're also part of a continuing set of no value indicated issues that come in some varieties we haven't gone over yet. So rather than talk about these now, I'm going to go over the other 201 level varieties and come back to these later. Instead, we're going to talk about the two Monarchs issues next. At first blush, these stamps might seem pretty straightforward based on what we've already covered. Mostly you can tell all these numbers apart by some combination of our old friends, the photo-litho difference and the Phosphor Bands. And of course there's that slightly tricky color variety of the 20p stamp, but that's not too hard either. You'll notice though that there are two numbers for the 15p bright blue that are lithographed, one printed by Walsall and the other by Questa. These are really easy to tell apart by a perforation difference. The Walsall is perforated 14 all around and the Questa is perforated 15 by 14, just like the Harrison printing. Don't memorize any of that, it's in the catalog when you need it, just to point out that there's nothing difficult with these differences. The other tricky one is the 20p litho from Questa and Cartor. Again, this is a simple perforation difference. The Questa uses the old style regular perforations, and Cartor uses the new style elliptical perforations. The only other thing to note on this page is the odd catalog number for the George V stamp. You might find this stamp as a used single. Heck, it's technically possible you could find it as a mint single, but I doubt it. That odd catalog number is for the souvenir sheet that this stamp comes off of. This stamp and its partner below were only released in this souvenir sheet. Neither one of these stamps has its own Stanley Gibbons catalog number. That seems like a reasonable choice for the catalog, but I sometimes find it a bit confusing. There are some stamps from souvenir sheets that come from other formats too. In those cases, the stamps get a number, but in cases like this, they don't. I point this out so you don't drive yourself crazy looking for the stamp's catalog number like I did. Next, let's walk through these elliptical perf issues. This is the top of my table for these stamps. Just like the regular perforated stamps, there's a lot of these elliptically perforated stamps. So much so that I also have 2 pages of index for them. Most of the differences in this table should by now be easy to understand. The one column that might be confusing is the one I've labeled 2002. There are only these two stamps in that 2002 column. These stamps come in the regular gum Y-numbered version and the self-adhesive version, which doesn't have Y numbers, and oddly enough have regular old catalog numbers, 2297 and 2298. These two decimal denominated stamps came out along with two non-value indicated stamps, a first-class stamp in gold and an E-rate stamp for use in Europe, numbers 2295 and 2296. Organizationally, I wanted to group the NVI stamps together and the elliptical perforated stamps together rather than make one random odd page with just these four stamps on it. I think that makes it easier for me to see the varieties. You could make a different choice with your collection. The rest of my Y table has a few new differences worth mentioning. These 5p and 54p stamps have two catalog numbers. The denominations are in different fonts. Look at the difference in the shape of the 5. Whether by accident or choice, I don't know, but when these stamps were included in the sheet from what the Royal Post calls a Prestige booklet, they used a different font. This Prestige booklet is called Classic Album Covers. Notice the album in the center of the stamps. Anyway, be on the lookout for this difference on these two stamps. This mini sheet came out as a souvenir sheet from the London 2010 Festival of Stamps. Every stamp on this sheet is lithographed, so easy to identify as singles, but 4 of them came out only on this sheet, and so they don't have their own catalog numbers. At our 201 collecting level, you might come across these denominations, but might be confused that they have no catalog numbers. At a 301 level, you'll want to collect both the cataloged version of these singles and the version that comes from this sheet. This souvenir sheet from the 2000 stamp show came out with all these stamps on it. None of these stamps have their own catalog number, but they are all printed in photogravure and could be confused with the 2 bands versions of the same stamp. These stamps all have the phosphor paper rather than the 2 bands. That's worth a notice and not so clear in the catalog. That 10p difference in the first column is a stamp perforation listed in the catalog. There's a similar perforation difference with the 38p stamp. But other than those, these Y-numbered stamps are easy to identify at the 201 catalog number level. Now we move on to our third big table, the U-numbered stamps. This table is big, but at least this one fits on one page, just 100 new catalog numbers. The stamps here all have advanced security features to help combat forgery and reuse. For reasons that will become clear in a moment, Stanley Gibbons decided to number these stamps starting with a U. This stamp shows 2 of these security features. Let's start with that funny thing going on around the 1 and the S in first. That's a cut through the stamp paper in the shape of 2 U's connected to form the shape of an O. There's a second one on the right of the stamp. Most of these U-numbered stamps have that U-slit security feature. Those U-slits are probably why Stanley Gibbons gave these stamps U-prefixed catalog numbers. The idea here is that the stamp holds together fine to put it on the envelope, but if you try to soak the stamp and remove it for reuse, that O part rips out and damages the stamp for reuse. It works really well, but that makes these a pain for collectors. We like to soak our stamps off paper before putting them on our collections. You never know how damaging that backing paper might be to the stamp in the long term. Probably not a big problem in our lifetime, since most paper these days is all but acid-free, but still that paper could have long-term archival issues. Time will tell. With that in mind, the current wisdom says that you shouldn't soak off these stamps. Instead, cut around the stamp as close as you safely can and accept that you're getting that paper in your collection too. The second security feature is that wavy text in the background of the stamp. Some of the stamps have this security text in the background of the stamp, and others have it as a very hard to see overprint on the stamp. For those stamps, it can be very hard to see the security text looking at the stamp head on. For those stamps, you can hold them askew to the light to see that security text. Now that text isn't just simple text that's the same from stamp to stamp. The text usually contains a secret code that tells the year the stamp was manufactured and the product source of the stamp. You can see in the upper right that some of the text that should say Royal Mail actually shows a 19. That's a date code for 2019. The date codes are easy to make sense of, but on the other side of the stamp is a code that says what product the stamp came from. Sheets, booklets, rolls of stamps, and the like. That exact code changes from issue to issue, but here are some of the codes for the gold no value indicated stamps. You can see how the different codes show up on the stamp, although most of these stamps share the same catalog number in Stanley Gibbons. At a 201 level, you usually don't have to care about these codes too much, although there are a few exceptions. You can see the last security feature on this stamp too. The backing paper for these stamps sometimes shows a pattern of the words Royal Mail. Here's a better image of it. This is not a feature you really have to worry about at the 201 level, but some stamps have these words and others don't, while still others have variants of the orientation of the words. More on that in the next section. You can see from the headers on this table that there's a lot of familiar features. These have photo and litho varieties. You'll also see that some of the stamps have the familiar Phosphor Bands. Also note that some of the stamps come as self-adhesive and others come as water-activated gum. Note that the first column of stamps says no codes. That means that those stamps have the U slits but not the date or source codes on them. The second column of stamps are dated and show the source code MPIL. The code is really just P, but the P replaces the A in mail. MPIL is just how people refer to it. As for the dates, you'll notice that I say that they're dated. When the same stamp is in production for multiple years, there will be multiple date codes, but at this 201 level, all of them will have the same catalog number. In the fourth column, the same is true for what I'm calling sourced. There are multiple source codes all associated with that single catalog number. A 301 level collector will collect all the known variants. That next column says 65th anniversary, and while you can't see any stamps listed in this image, there is one stamp that is different than the others. This 5-pound stamp doesn't really look like it belongs with a U number. It doesn't have those U slits on it, but it does have a security code that isn't visible in this image. That security code says 65th anniversary in place of the Royal Mail date and source codes. This is for the Queen's 65th anniversary of being the Queen. The column after that says 50th anniversary. That's not for the anniversary of the Queen, but rather for the anniversary of the Machin stamp itself. That gold stamp on the end is it. All the stamps on this page are reproductions of various Machin stamps through the years. This particular 1-pound stamp was also released in a Prestige booklet in a block of 4. The stamps from this booklet are lithographed, not photogravure. From that booklet, this stamp has a U catalog number. That's listed in the last column of the page. But this version of the same gold stamp is photogravure, and yet it doesn't have a catalog number other than the number for the mini sheet. I guess you could count this as a 301 level detail since it doesn't have a catalog number, but I listed it here because that difference interests me. You could pick differently. The rest of the differences in this table are in that gummed lithograph column. They fall into 2 categories. The first is for cases where the P source code is missing from the code. The second category is for stamps of slightly different shades. In all those cases, they also have different date codes, so it might be easier to check those date codes than to figure out which color is which. Overall, these codes certainly make for more variants, but the catalog usually only numbers one of them. Collecting all possible combinations of codes and dates is a 301 level collecting choice. Now we know enough to go back to the various no-value indicated stamps. I've broken mine across 5 pages, but still I've grouped all these together to make it easier to sort them. Each of these blocks in the table is for one of those pages. There's a lot going on here, but nothing hard other than managing the complexity. That first block has regular perfs. They all have regular gum. The rest have elliptical perfs, either gummed or self-adhesive. The fourth block shows the stamps with security features, and the fifth block separates out the stamps with the various service indicators. We'll take a brief look at each of these. This is the table for the regular perf stamps. The 4 different colors are shown along the top. The only confusion with this set is the difference between the lithographed stamps from Walsall and Questa. Fortunately, that's just a perforation difference. The Harrison and Questa stamps are all perforated 15 by 14, while the Walsall stamps are perforated 14 all around. Don't memorize that, it's in the catalog when you need it. These are all gummed stamps with elliptical perfs. These stamps are largely easy to tell apart knowing what you already know. The minor differences at the catalog number level, our 201 level, have to do with different perforations and phosphor band positions. although at the 301 level there's a lot more going on with these. And these stamps are the self-adhesive stamps with the elliptical perfs. I've illustrated the difference between the first and second column of the stamps in the stamps at the top of this page. Note the size of the ST in first. One is small and the other is large. The other difference on this page is the B version of those 1998 stamps. These stamps have what are called Dagger Perfs. They are a rare perforation difference that only appears on these two stamps. Notice the difference between the corner of the regular stamp on the left and the daggers of the rare version on the right. A fiddling detail, I agree. Now we come to the NVI stamps with security features. I won't spend any time on these. Yes, there are multiple numbers under some of these columns, but that might just be me being lazy creating this table. Those are all variants of things we've already talked about, but pulling them into their own columns seemed more confusing than helpful. When you get some of these, armed with the catalog and everything else we've covered, you'll be able to identify all of these easily. And finally, we have these service-indicated stamps. There's not a thing confusing about the varieties of these either. The only difference between the last two columns are whether the stamps have date codes or not. You got this. The last type of stamp that came out in the Queen's reign were these barcoded stamps. Each individual stamp is unique. Except that these were printed centrally, I don't know what the difference is between these and a printed postage label. Nobody I know likes these barcoded designs, but I guess that's the price we're paying because of forgers. Knowing what you know, these stamps should be easy to identify. For some unknown reason, Stanley Gibbons decided to give different catalog numbers to these stamps based on the source code. I don't see the point of that, but it is what it is. Those two stamps with the A variants are a little interesting. For these two variants, there are interruptions in the die cuts at the 8 marked locations. These stamps come from Prestige booklets, but I don't know why they have these breaks. And with that, I think we're done with our 201 overview of the Machin catalog numbered stamps. Phew, that was a lot. 692 catalog numbers, give or take, depending on how you count. It's complex, but not really that difficult at this level. This is the level I collect to, and although from time to time I find a variant that I tuck into my album, but so far I haven't been striving to collect beyond the stamps listed here in this catalog. Time to say goodbye to this guy, though. Next, we're moving on to the 301 collecting level. I won't go into as much detail on this one. I just want to hit the high points about the kind of things that advanced Machin collectors look for. If you're up for it, let's dive in a little bit deeper. Take a look at this 1.5 black stamp. I picked this one because there's only one type of these in the catalog. It has number X848. Just this one stamp at the 201 level. That second table is from the Adminware Machin website. I've put a link to this site in the episode notes. Robin Harris created and maintains this site and stylizes himself as the Machin Nut. Robin was kind enough to give me permission to use images from his site. I couldn't have put all this together without his support. Thank you, Robin. If you want the written form of this video, I'd suggest you get his document, Simplifying the Machins, aka Machins 101. I have to admit that I borrowed the idea of organizing this video into 101, 201 levels, etc. from this document. By the way, look at the bottom corner. Price free. How can you beat that? Robin also offers a free 101 level in my terms stamp album. And for not much money, he has other levels of increasingly detailed printable albums. Robin also has a searchable database of the Machin stamps, and this table is the output of that database for our 1.5 Machin. Notice that this table has 7 lines for this one stamp. 7. Robin chose 2 different phosphor types, 2 types of paper, sheet and booklet formats, 2 types of gum, and if you look at the details of the booklet singles column, you'll see another 10 varieties there. So that list of 7 stamps becomes 13 varieties in the hands of a Machin nut. The one thing you won't find in this table is Stanley Gibbons catalog numbers. That makes it a little difficult to correlate the details of these stamps to the catalog. Oh well, I can see why Stanley Gibbons might not want to share their proprietary value with potential competition. There's one other resource I want to point you to for a deep dive into Machin stamps. This isn't a free catalog, but much of the details of the single stamps is available for free on the site. This is the Connoisseur's Guide to Collecting Machin Stamps. I'll put a link to this catalog in the episode notes. I haven't figured out how to show paper types and gum types in a video. I don't even have examples of these in my collection, so I won't try to explain those here. Robin lists 10 different paper types on his site with various types of coatings, fluorescent and phosphorescent reactions, brightening agents, chalk coatings, and shininess. As for gums, Robin describes 3 types: gum arabic, dextrin, and PVA. I wish I could show these too. These are 3 stamps with different colors of phosphor bands. You can't see these without a UV light, so to do a 301 level collection, you're going to need one of those. Also, there are 2 different kinds of reactions with these bands. Some of them are fluorescent, which means that they show their color when you shine a long wave UV light on them. Others are phosphorescent, which means they charge up under shortwave, not long wave UV light, and only show their color as an afterglow when you turn off the light. There's a lot more to these phosphor bands than center, left, right, and 2 bands. This shows all the different varieties of phosphor band configurations except for the normal 4 that go all the way across the stamps. Some are offset from the left or the right side, some don't extend all the way across the stamp, and some have a little notch in one corner. These variations are really helpful in identifying the source of the stamp because these configurations were used to avoid putting phosphor incorrectly on neighboring stamps, which was necessary when stamps were mixed together in a single booklet or sheet. Oh, and even with our regular phosphor bands, there are 2 widths, either 8 or 9.5 millimeters across 2 neighboring stamps. Hey, I warned you that the 301 level was detailed. Cataloging many of these varieties are in service of determining the source of the stamp, which really has 2 meanings in this case. One is obvious from this table. Did it come from a sheet or a booklet? The other is less obvious. Sometimes the exact stamp and source comes from 2 different printers, or possibly more. Knowing that, the 301 collector looks for ways to identify these different printers. That's where many of these varieties came about from. Let's look at another stamp. First thing to notice about this table is the heading right under the 1P crimson line, EME print. The EME stands for electromechanically engraved. In 1997, Royal Mail changed the way it rendered the portrait to this new method. The EME image is on the right. The new image is sharper and cleaner. And can it be that they gave the Queen a little chin tuck? There are 4 types of this EME version of this Elliptical Perf stamp. There's another 4 types of the non-EME version. Between these 2 versions, there were 5 different printers. There's one other printing difference that comes up from time to time. The bottom of the top bust is flatter than the bottom of the other stamp's bust. I find this hard to tell even with the reference images right in front of me. Also notice that column for value setting. A number of stamps show this kind of table. They often have to do with either the position of the value or the shape of the numbers. For this stamp, we have 2 thicknesses of the letters to help us tell the printers apart. For other stamps, like the 12P example, there are variations in the positions of the numbers. There's also this odd difference. Notice that the stamp on the left has shading in the number, while the stamp on the right is white. The screen print on the left extended into the numbering. Many stamps come with both a screened version and an unscreened version. Sometimes the difference between printers requires looking at stamp-specific differences. On the top, we have tricks to tell the printings of the Millennium Machin. Each of these differences are very fine details. On the bottom, there are ways to tell the different high-value engraved printings apart. We're going to use one more example to get to the end of this 301 level summary, this security feature stamp. The first thing to remember with these stamps at a 301 level is that they come with these hidden codes that show the dates and sources of the stamp. Of course, a 301 level collection needs to include all these date and source code combinations. The next thing I want to point out is the column on the right labeled security slits. The regular U slits are like example 1, one U flipped and stacked on the other. But there are 3 variants of these slits too. The second type has breaks in the U's at both the top and bottom. Type 2A also has breaks, but those breaks are smaller. And finally, type 3 just has a break on the bottom U. And next, look at that last column on the right that says backing paper. I had to break this table up a little bit to fit on the screen, but the far right column on that second table shows some of those possibilities. This is the backing paper on those self-adhesive stamps. Notice the alternating thick and thin lines saying Royal Mail. On some of those stamps, the backing paper was unprinted, or as the table lists, plain. There are a number of variants of how the words are laid out on these backing papers. I've put one of those variants on the right for comparison. The pairs of thick and thin lines alternate between being upright and upside down. There are other minor variants, but you can look those up if you want to collect at this level. I'd love to give you a full count of all the variants at the 301 level, but it's a little subjective and depends on what details you want to save in your own collection. Certainly there's a lifetime of collecting in this Machin set alone. That's it for this 301 level collecting, and that's more than I collect by a lot, but I'm impressed by people who can track this level of detail. But there is one level of detail beyond even this. I'm just going to pop up one more image to talk about that. I promise we're almost done. Let's call this 401 collecting. It's a level of detail that goes beyond what you can imagine. First on this list are error stamps. There's a number of known errors, and some I'm sure yet to be found. Many of these are errors where the phosphor bands have been left off the printing. This is really hard to catch. Next is collecting all the booklet pane locations. So it's one thing to collect an example of the stamps from every type of booklet. It's another to collect a stamp from every position on every booklet. Now if you collect unused stamps, this is really easy. You just collect a copy of every intact booklet pane. That's cheating. Now to make this even harder, some British booklet panes don't cut the edges of the stamps flat. The perfs are still there. The only way to tell that they come from the booklet pane is to look really close at the edge to see which ones are machine cut and which ones are torn from the sheet. This can be an obsession for a used stamp collector. Honestly, this sounds kind of tempting to me. Next, there are some variations on those elliptical perforations. Two stamps were accidentally released with the elliptical perfs at the top of the stamps. These might be part of a 301 level collection, but I'll mention them here. The other perf variation is too small to show on the screen. Some of the elliptical perfs have flat edges and others have rounded edges. This is an artifact of the perforation machine used on some of those stamps. Next is that odd 17-pin perforation variety. Apparently a pin on one of the perforation machines broke, and when it was repaired by hand, an extra hole was added by mistake. So in this pair of stamps, there are 17 holes between them where the other edges only have 16. This shows up in 16 different types of these stamps. Perforation style is the same as the variety of elliptical perforations. Different perforating machines left slightly different shaped holes. Some people track their stamps to this level of detail. And if seeing phosphor details wasn't hard enough, there were two printing screens used for printing the phosphor bands. One at 150 resolution and the other at 250. I don't think my eyes are good enough to see that even if I wanted to. And finally, sometimes the direction the paper was fed into the printer can be determined for a stamp. From the top, from the bottom, left, or the right. Again, that's a level of detail I don't think I could even see if I knew how to look for it. I'm glad we're at the end. I bet you are too. But I do find it interesting to know the level of obsession people can have with their collections. As for me, I think I'll stick to my 201 level collecting, with some variation slipping in from time to time. Let me know in the comments if you made it to the end by sharing what level you collect to.